Gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for coming to participate in Chantilly High School's quadrennial presidential debate. The format will run as follows. You will have the opportunity to make an opening statement of no more than 2 minutes. I will then ask questions. Each of you will go first one time, starting with Mr. Turner, and then each will have a start. We'll have 5 questions. We'll have 6. If we have time, we'll use the 6th one. These questions were designed by the Chantilly government teachers. I will then open it up afterwards for student and faculty questions. Responses will be limited to 2 minutes. At 10:15, we'll wrap up and close with closing statements of 1 minute. For the audience, I'd like to introduce each one. Representing the Constitution Party is Mitch Turner. Mitch is the chairman of the Constitution Party of Virginia. He is a naval graduate and served as a cryptologic officer for 12 years. He is taught at the collegiate level and leads web development and marketing efforts at commercial and nonprofit organizations. He and his wife, Cheryl, homeschooled their 11 children. Representing the Virtual Good campaign, please welcome Mitch Turner. For the Democratic Party, we have Anish Chopra. Anish was the first U.S. Chief Technology Officer for President Obama and is a current candidate for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia. As an assistant to the President, he designed the National Wireless Initiative and executed an open innovation strategy across the government built on private sector collaboration. Representing the Barack Obama campaign, please welcome Anish Chopra. For the Libertarian Party, we have William Redpath. William is an at-large representative on the Libertarian National Committee and a former national chair of the United States Libertarian Party. Currently a resident of Leesburg, Virginia, Mr. Redpath is a vice president of BIA Kelsey, a financial consulting firm in media and telecommunications. Previously, he was a senior financial analyst with NBC in New York, an internal auditor with ABC in New York, assistant financial manager with WISH-TV in Indianapolis, and an auditor with Arthur Andersen in Cincinnati. Representing the Gary Johnson campaign, please welcome Bill Redpath. For the Republican Party, we have Mr. James Lemonnier. Jim is a Republican and was first elected to the Virginia House of Delegates in November 2009. He is a 29-year resident of Northern Virginia. In the House of Delegates, Jim serves on 3 committees: General Laws, Education, and Counties, Cities, and Towns. On the House floor, Jim is the Deputy Majority Whip. Since he was first elected, 17 of Jim's bills have become law in addition to his resolution requiring members' voting records be easily retrievable online. As a technology company entrepreneur for more than 20 years, Jim has started and continues to help build technology businesses. He understands how jobs are created and what it takes to make our economy grow. Representing the Mitt Romney campaign, please welcome Delegate Jim Lemonnier. Gentlemen, you will now have 2 minutes each to give your opening statements. Mr. Turner.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the privilege of addressing you today. I can make a prediction with absolute certainty. In we elect a Republican or a Democrat as president this November, in 4 years, government will be bigger, our debt will be greater, and you will have less freedom. The people who have made things worse will be telling you solutions to the problems that they've created. We're supposed to be a nation of laws and limited government, so we can enjoy the blessings of liberty. Neither the Republicans or the Democrats look at the rules, which is the Constitution, and apply them the way they were written. For the establishment parties, and unfortunately progressives in general, the Constitution is something they have to work around, or something they twist beyond recognition. There's only one party and only one presidential candidate, Virgil Goode, of the Constitution Party, who will govern by the rules. And today you are going to be promised many things, and you're getting lots of promises during this campaign. The thing is, they want to buy your vote. And the really sad thing is, they want to buy your vote with your money. There's over $50 trillion of promises that have been made, and $16 trillion that we've already borrowed, and we don't have any way of paying any of it back. You, your children, and your grandchildren for many generations have been put in line to buy votes of the people today. Virgil Goode is not offering to buy your vote. He's going to follow the Constitution and limit the powers of government to what they're supposed to be. You get the freedom and the responsibility to make decisions about your money, your family, your life, your property, your job. No matter what they say, the Republicans and Democrats govern like you, and your stuff belong to them.
Mr. Turner, thank you. Thank you. 2 minutes is up. Mr. Chopra.
Thank you so much for having me, and I want to spend my time this morning talking about your future. I joined President Obama on the transition team, and I noted at that time the difficult economic conditions we inherited. And to share with you the perspective of this, at the time we took office, Americans, for the first time in our nation's history, felt that the kids and grandkids will have a worse future than of our generation. This was born out of a decade of neglect for investments in our nation's future. A benchmarking study comparing America to 40 other countries ranked the United States dead last on the rate of improvement on key innovation metrics. The President of the United States instituted a swift plan of recovery, but I want to share a bit about the reinvestment side of the Recovery and Reinvestment Act, because it was about building the foundation for the economy you will enter. The President believed very strongly that we need to invest in the building blocks of innovation, our human capital, our research and development assets, and digital infrastructure for the 21st century. He believed that we need rules of the road that lower barriers to entry and promote market competition. But most importantly, he believes in us. He wanted us to help collaborate to solve the big challenges of our day in healthcare and energy and education. President Obama has invested in those programs, and over the next decade, we will bear the fruits. If re-elected, President Obama will ensure that we will ensure access to higher education by cutting tuition growth by 50% and rewarding states that increase access to affordable higher education, by essentially reducing our dependence on foreign oil by 50% by the year 2020, by ensuring we have 2 million more skilled workers, and that we dramatically expand startups and new businesses, because it's new businesses that are the disproportionate share of our long-term economic growth. That's what President Obama would do moving forward.
2 minutes ago. Mr. Britton.
Thank you to Chantilly High School for having us today, particularly having representatives of the non-Republican, non-Democratic parties up here. Unfortunately, the Commission on Presidential Debates once again excluded everyone except the Republican candidate and Democratic candidate for president. If you want to see the real minor party candidates for president, there was a debate held at the University of Chicago 2 days ago, October 23rd, among the minor party candidates for president. It's on YouTube. If they had been included in the major party debate, it would have been they would have had much more interesting debates and much more informative debates, I assure you. So by all means, YouTube for the minor party debate from 2 days ago, in case you're interested. The Libertarian Party stands for libertarianism. Well, what is that? It's a combination of conservative positions on economic issues and liberal positions on social issues. We believe that people should be able to live their lives as they choose, without interference, as long as they are not harming other people or their property. Consequently, we call for greatly reduced government spending, which isn't really investment, most of the time it's government spending, reduction of taxes, and real respect for civil liberties. But you hear talk about the debt these days, the $1 trillion deficits. It's much worse than the major party politicians are letting on. Boston University economist Lawrence Kotlikoff says that the fiscal gap, the difference between the present value of future federal government expenditures and the present value of future federal government receipts, is $222 trillion. $222 trillion is 14 times the annual gross domestic product of the United States. Everybody agrees that we are on an unsustainable path. Only the Libertarian Party, which stands for much smaller government, will put this nation on a path to fiscal solvency for the long run. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Lemoine.
Thank you. Good to be with you at Chantilly High again, and it's my privilege to represent Chantilly High School and about 80,000 people in western Fairfax and eastern Loudoun counties in the Virginia legislature. I hope you've been following the debates and the campaigns this year. As campaigns go, this is maybe one of the more exciting ones in my lifetime, I think it's fair to say. I think both Republicans and Democrats would agree on that. To sum up where we are in the campaign, I would frame it this way, and then maybe we can get into some of the details with your questions. If you think that the American economy is going to get better, or that America in general is going to prosper more by making the government bigger in Washington, I would respectfully suggest that you vote for Barack Obama, and while you're at it, Tim Kaine for U.S. Senate, because fundamentally, on a whole range of issues across the board, that's their worldview. That's what they believe, and that's what the 1,000 or so people that the president hires to run the federal agencies believe. But if you're not so sure about that, or at a gut level that just doesn't quite make sense to you, you have a choice. If you think the federal government ought to limit its work to the things it can do best, let the states handle things that they can do best, understanding Virginia might have needs different than Florida or California or Alaska. If the $16 trillion debt is not just another number to you, and you don't want to see that go to 20 or 30 and be paying that and have your children and grandchildren paying that, and if you think the economy works best when the government's role is that of referee, you know, making sure the rules are played fairly, but not the quarterback, not the coach, not kicking the field goal or running the pass or catching the pass, then I would respectfully suggest that Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan are your candidates for president and vice president, while you're at it, George Allen and Frank Wolf for Senate and Congress, because that's fundamentally their worldview and what they believe in a range of issues. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, gentlemen, we're going to have a series of questions. The first question, we'll start with Mr. Turner. Each of you will have a chance to respond after the 2 minutes is up, and we'll switch to Mr. Chopra, and then so on down the line. And the second question, Mr. Chopra will start, and we'll do it the same way, 2 minutes. And we'll keep time. Okay, here's the first question. What does your candidate see as the #1 threat to American security, national security? And what will he or she do about it?
Thank you. The #1 threat to the nation is this debt that Mr. Redpath and I have been talking about. We cannot sustain this debt, and we cannot have leadership in the world while we keep spending money that we don't have. People know that our money is no good. They know that we cannot be counted on in the future to prop up all these different countries. We're spending money in Greece, in Spain, trying to prop up these countries. And eventually, if we look at those nations in Europe, we see them falling apart because they have promised extra vacation. They've promised great retirement benefits. They promised, sick leave for many, many days, and the 35-hour week, and oh, that's too long. We need to reduce that. They can't work for 35 hours a week. Okay? Those nations are crumbling. You see on the news they're having riots in the streets because the government cannot keep fulfilling those promises. Virgil Goode is going to balance the budget. We constantly hear, oh, we have a plan to balance the budget over the next 10 years. The problem is they spend right away, and the promises are for the future, and of course they get changed before we get there. Virgil Goode is going to eliminate major programs, including many places where we have soldiers and sailors defending, for 50 years in Korea. The war is over. It's been won. The South Korean people are rich. We spend $40 billion a year keeping people there just as a tripwire so we can get involved if there's a war. We need to really, really cut government, and Virgil Goode is going to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
President Obama strongly believes that our nation's first responsibility is to protect the American people. That is why President Obama kept his promises from the day he announced his intentions to seek the presidency of the United States. He promised that we would end the war in Iraq. He promised that we would get and go after Osama bin Laden. President Obama strongly believes a vibrant and vigorous security posture is critical. But in the eyes of our military, economic growth is an equally important aspect of our security posture. And that is why President Obama wants to ensure that the U.S. economy is built from the middle out. A world where just the very few accrue 90+% of all of the economic gains is a world that 10, 20 years from now will make America far weaker. But a world of broad-based, vibrant, middle-class prosperity, that's a world where we will lead in a position of strength. Long-term, for those of us in this audience, we must tackle the issues of energy independence. It is the engine that drives the American economy. And under President Obama, we have built a significant foundation for long-term economic growth on a cleaner energy future. The fastest job category in energy isn't oil and gas or coal. It is, believe it or not, solar panel installations, because we've seen a dramatic reduction in the cost and the technology to bring out access to solar and wind and other renewable sources. Capturing Americans' share of that economy is critical to positioning us for the decades to come. And the final observation about security is we must be vigilant about security here at home. That's why President Obama has been absolutely on the forefront of ensuring that domestic opportunities, including protecting our internet infrastructure through cybersecurity, is a key area of growth and importance for our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford.
I say ask the experts. You've got people in the military even, and politicians who are in office today saying that the national debt, the accumulated national debt, is the primary threat to the security of the United States. In 1958, in the Suez Crisis, President Eisenhower got the United Kingdom to do what he wanted them to do by threatening to take actions that would adversely affect the value of the British pound. They were in a vulnerable situation. He was able to get them to change their military strategy simply by threatening actions that would hurt the economy of the United Kingdom. Is the same thing going to happen with threats from China to the United States sometime in the future? If we don't clean up our act, that is a serious threat. But to show how profligate the major parties are, it's not really that hard to balance the budget. According to Dan Mitchell of the Cato Institute, if we froze federal spending for 6 years, we would have a balanced budget, a balanced federal budget. If we allowed it to grow by only 2% per year for 10 years, we would have a balanced federal budget. It just shows how out of control government spending is, under the control of both Republicans and Democrats, that a little bit of restraint is absolutely off the table, which would, in a relatively painless way, get us to a balanced budget. Governor Johnson, former governor of New Mexico, he served 2 terms as governor of New Mexico, wants to immediately balance the budget, however, by cutting 43% of federal spending immediately to bring us to a balanced budget. And with respect to entitlements, which has to be addressed. That's the big issue in our economy going forward. He wants to block grant Medicare and Medicaid payments to the states and to get people into a program to allow people, instead of paying Social Security taxes, and that's what they are when they come out of your paycheck, to have a system whereby you're allowed to invest in private individual accounts that are allowed to grow over the course of your life. It's a much better deal than being forced to pay Social Security taxes, and those are his plans to
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. You tread path. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe your question was asked in almost the same words to the candidates at the debate on Monday night. I believe the answer Mr. Romney gave was the Iranian nuclear weapons program, and I think he's right. If you're not familiar with the Iranian nuclear weapons program, for the last more than 20 years, the government of Iran has been actively engaged in basically thumbing its nose at the international community in developing a nuclear weapon. And as Governor Romney said, they are 4 years closer today than they were when President Obama took office. Why is that important to Americans? It's a country that's far away. The government of Iran has, for the last 2 to 3 decades, actively supported terrorist networks around the world that have killed Americans. A nuclear weapon that could be developed by Iran, just don't imagine that in some storage facility in Iran. Imagine that being smuggled into the United States and being detonated in an American city. Now, the candidates didn't say that, but that's really what's going on if you talk to the president. Republican or Democrat national security advisors, and that's why that's a concern. Unfortunately, President Obama has been slow to get about the business of applying sanctions and pressure on Iran. I think that came up at the debate Monday night as well. There is more to be done. Mitt Romney said he would do more things, and by way of contrast, this goes back a few years, I think before many of you, or all of you were born, except for the teachers, but during the 1980s, there was the apartheid government in South Africa that was actively running a society that kept people separate based on their color. The international community said, no, we're not going to tolerate that. That's absolutely unacceptable. We actually had more sanctions, the U.S. and the international community, on South Africa in the late 80s than we have on Iran today. Yet they could come up with a nuclear weapon, or many of them, and wreak damage that we haven't seen ever. And so that's why that's a concern.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. The next question deals with unemployment. We're going to start with Mr. Chalker. The unemployment rate is now 7.8%. And there are still millions of Americans without jobs. What will your candidate do to ensure that there are jobs available when the young people in this audience enter the workforce?
Well, let me first make a very clear point about the importance of the jobs picture in America. For Americans with college degrees or their equivalent, the unemployment rate is at or below 5%. So my first message to all of you is to ensure that you proceed with obtaining the skills that you need to compete in our global economy. That is why President Obama has fought so hard to ensure you have access to higher education. We've dramatically expanded Pell Grants. We've reined in profligate spending in both private and public institutions by engaging in a collaborative way to get universities focused on lowering costs to access higher education. So point number one, just to be clear for all of you, the economy for those with the skills and jobs of the future is actually fairly strong. In fact, there are over 3 million open, unfilled jobs throughout the country. And we're here in Northern Virginia. I talk to CEOs every single day who are having a difficult time hiring workers with the skills they need to compete. So let me be very clear for you what the message is. For the broader economy, if you look at where we have the highest levels of unemployment, they are in areas of the American economy where we've had a significant shock to the system. A reduction in our manufacturing capacity going back a decade, a reduction in our capacity to build roadways, railways, and runways, our construction industries. These industries are starting to come back because we're seeing an uptick in the housing starts. President Obama put some initial rules of the road and policies in place to stabilize the housing situation, and we're starting to see those rules come into action. But now we must move even more forward faster. The President said, we want to put 100,000 teachers who are experts in science, technology, engineering, and math so that the next generation has the skills they need to compete. We want to expand by 2 million the number that get college degrees or community college with skills tied to specific employers.
Thank you, Mr. Chopper.
And that's just the beginning.
Thank you.
Economic freedom is the driver of prosperity. It's that simple. There is a publication that comes out every year. It just came out, I think, about a month ago for this year, called the Index of Economic Freedom. I strongly urge you to take a look at it. For a long time, the United States ranked third. We're ostensibly the land of the free. That's what we're told. For a long time, the United States ranked third, behind Hong Kong and Singapore. And ranking third in the world in terms of economic freedom isn't bad. But it fell last year, over a number of years, it fell to 10th place. Now the report this year says the United States ranks 19th among nations in the world in terms of economic freedom. Canada ranks higher in terms of economic freedom now than does the United States. The United States is on a downward trajectory due to capitalism. The Obama administration's treatment of the Chrysler bankruptcy, where they subordinated the interests of senior debt holders to that of labor unions. That hurt our ranking in terms of economic freedom. We need, in terms of economic freedom, we need a smaller government. Again, I need to go back to the debt issue. There is a book, This Time It's Different, written by a couple of academics who said in their research, they looked at what had happened in the past in various nations, and they said once publicly held debt divided by GDP is 90% or greater, there is reduced future growth by about 1 percentage point per year. Now that doesn't sound a lot, but year after year after year, you pile that on, you're going to have a much smaller economy with much lower economic growth once we go over that 90% figure. 1 year ago it was 67%, now it's 73%. Publicly held debt divided by gross domestic product. We are on a path where we're going to go clean past 90%, well into the hundreds. That is going to strangle economic growth in this nation, and it's going to make all of us going forward poorer. The way to address this is to restrain government spending. Libertarian presidential candidate Barry Johnson will do just that.
Thank you, Mr. Redman.
Well, except for the mention of his candidate at the end, I agree with just about everything Mr. Bedpath said on that question. Let me just further amplify by looking at things in these terms. Since World War II, the share that the federal government has taken through taxes and borrowing of the American economy has stayed around 20%. About 1/5 of all the output of the United States over the last several decades has been directed to government programs, whether it's social programs or national defense. In the last 4 years, under this big government mindset of the Obama administration, that's now increased to 24 to 25. I'm not counting state and local government, which usually takes us into the 30s. If we continue that trajectory, in a few years we're going to be at 40 or maybe even 50% of the American economy and its output being directed through taxes and borrowing into the federal government. Mr. Redpath's exactly right about what happens when the government gets too big. It becomes a burden and wears down the ability of private industry, which is a source of job creation, not government, to create new jobs, to grow and expand, create new products. Just to give you a point of reference about why that's a concern, the country of France has actually done this. Their unemployment rate has been under 8% for maybe a few months over the last 30 years. They'd love to have Americans' unemployment rate. You know what, in France, the government takes 52% out of the French economy. That's where the Obama administration is headed. I don't think that's the direction we ought to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Okay, we're going to keep on the economic issue. Oh, I am sorry. Mr. Turner.
Ladies and gentlemen, something you need to really be aware of is that the federal government cannot create jobs, except for the people they actually hire. Mitt Romney is saying, oh, we're going to create 12 million jobs. Barack Obama said, we're going to have the unemployment rate under 6% by the time at the end of my first term. Now, an interesting side note that for some reason nobody ever covers is that Obama and the media defending him say, oh, well, he didn't know how bad it was. Ladies and gentlemen, If they do not even understand the problem and are throwing trillions of dollars at it, why would we trust them when they say we know how to fix the problem? Can't be done, ladies and gentlemen. We do not control jobs from Washington. The regulatory burden on businesses, starting up a small business, is huge between the county, state, and federal regulations. The federal government has no business dictating what some mom and pop shop in Virginia does with their business. We need to totally get the federal government out of people's businesses. And the corporate tax burden, the corporations don't pay taxes, you do. Those are incorporated into their prices. And the reason that everything is cheaper at Walmart and it's all made in China is because we load all these regulations and taxes on businesses. Now, the Republicans are down there saying, oh, we're gonna do something about this, and we're gonna cut tax rates, and they never do. We have a long history of them saying they're gonna do it, but it just doesn't happen. Virgil Goode is actually going to do that, and he doesn't even need the support of Congress for most of these things. He only needs 1/3 of the Congress, and he can veto many of these regulations and spending bills. So he is actually going to do that as opposed to the promises that we've heard over the last 20 years.
Thank you. Okay, next question, Mr. Gribbin, starting. I'll try not to leave off too of you this time. Okay, ensure that the United States can provide for its people while staying financially afloat.
Well, I think, first of all, again, entitlements have to be addressed. Gary Johnson wants to turn Medicare and Medicaid into block grants to the states and have the states administer those programs. We've done this once before in 1996 with welfare reform. It worked wonderfully. Instead of programs being administered by the federal government, money was sent directly, block grants to the states to do as they thought was best to manage the welfare problem. And the results were greatly reduced welfare rolls and greatly reduced expenditures on welfare. And the same can happen through Medicare and Medicaid. What's great about federalism, that is more control with the states than with the federal government, is that you have 50 laboratories of democracy, plus the District of Columbia, how does mankind advance? It's through trial and error. This works, this doesn't work, we learn, we lick our wounds and move on, but we've learned something, even when we fail. And that's what would happen, I think, by devolving more power to the states here, reduce federal spending, bring the federal budget into balance. And also we have to recognize one other thing. Too often it's thought that any sort of collective action has to be through government. That's not the case at all. There are private organizations that do and need to take a role going forward to provide for the people on a voluntary basis. And that has to have a stepped up role, I think, in the future. But on the path we're on right now, until we take common sense steps to reduce the burden of common spending, in the long run, we are all going to be poorer. But that's how I would suggest we address the situation, the needs of the people. It is best done through the states and not through the federal government, which is not as close to the people as the states, and then takes a cut of taxes for administration. It's largely a waste, and that's how I think we need to address this, address the needs of people who are truly needy, and maintain fiscal solvency going forward in the United States.
Thank you.
That's a question that probably deserves an hour in terms of fully going through all the different details. I'll just make 2 points. One is the example that we have in Virginia. Virginia has a balanced budget. Okay, I voted for it. Government can really do it. There's a couple of, they're not secrets, there's no magic to it, but there's really one thing you have to do when you balance a budget, whether it's the federal government, the state budget, or a local budget. You have to say no to some people. You have to set priorities. Government can't be all things to all people. And that's how we do it in Virginia. We actually, when we consider the budget on the House floor and amendments come up, there's actually a staff person in the back of the calculator making sure that the sum total of amendments that pass or don't put the budget in the red. Imagine if Washington could do something like that. So that the real issue, and I'm talking in big terms, not all the details, is we've got to be able to set priorities in Washington. And and say no to people as much merit as many programs have. One way to do that is to amend the U.S. Constitution, which Mitt Romney supports, to require a balanced federal budget. We have that amendment in the Virginia Constitution, and we abide by it. And we're not accumulating debt that your children and grandchildren will someday have to pay at the state level. The other point I'll make is there's no solution to balancing the budget that doesn't include economic growth. Okay, we've got to put more people back to work so they're paying taxes and not collecting unemployment or welfare benefits or things like that. And so an approach of economic policy that relies on the private sector with government playing referee, getting out of the way, looking at regulations from a cost-benefit standpoint, not just a benefit standpoint from the government's point of view, is the direction that we need to head and is absolutely essential to balancing the federal budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
It is the spending line. Okay? The spending is the problem. And we've heard some great words already from the Republican end, and we hear from Mr. Obama also that they're going to cut spending. It never happens. Just look at their track records of both parties and ask yourself, why would you believe that they're going to cut spending? If they cut spending, that would actually reduce their power. The federal government would not be as involved in as many things as it is. And you're not as important as a congressman or senator if you aren't controlling a really big budget. That's why we need somebody to come in and literally veto most of the spending that the government does. And the Republican and Democratic candidates are simply not willing to do that. The other thing that needs to be done, and has been proven to work if we follow it, is to reduce taxes. President Kennedy, a Democrat, said the problem is not that taxes are too low, it's that they're too high. He lowered taxes, he in Congress, and President Reagan did the same, President Bush did the same. Revenue to the government increased after those tax cuts because of the economic growth that followed. So when people, especially Democrats, say you have to pay for the tax cuts, those are tax cuts for the rich. No, that is a lie. The problem is, it's the spending. When they have cut taxes, they have ballooned the spending far beyond the increases of revenue. So we need to cut taxes, we need to cut spending drastically, not just hold the line. We need to cut it for real, and Virgil Goode will do that.
You know,
Thank you.
just a quick set of rebuttal points. In the Bush administration, we cut taxes and we didn't increase revenues. We lost trillions. That's what's accounting for the deficit blowing out of control, number one. Number two, the reason Virginia has a balanced budget is because the federal government spent nearly $1 billion bailing out the states in the Recovery Act. So to say that Virginia did it entirely on its own is foolish. I was in the governor's cabinet in Virginia. I know how the math works. We accept revenues from Washington as a big chunk of our budgets in the states. It's a big part of how the federalism in our country works. But there are two very important points about the budget deficit. Number one, a group of thoughtful experts that the president called for, including CEOs of some of the largest corporations in America, public-private, both parties at the table, basically said what we need to do to get our deficits under control and our fiscal situation is to achieve about a $4 trillion reduction over the course of what we call medium to long term in the American economy. And $4 trillion, the debate all we're having in the country is where is the share of that $4 trillion coming from? How much of that is coming from new revenues and how much of that is coming from cuts? We've already cut $1 trillion in the American budget. That is what President Obama has already done. And he's saying he'll put another $2.50 in cuts on the table for every $1 in revenue we can produce by going back to the tax rates we had under President Bill Clinton when our economy generated 23 million jobs. And my buddies in the internet economy didn't care paying for those taxes. They were just fine because they were generating wealth and growing our economy at the same time. But here's the punchline. For the entire conversation everyone's here having about our budget and our spending, there's one root cause: the growth in the cost of healthcare. Unless we constrain the growth of cost in healthcare, the rest of this stuff is irrelevant. You can get rid of all student loans, all research and development, all highway spending. You can cut everything else, and you will still see long-term deficits and debt problems unless we constrain healthcare costs. And if we get to that question, I'll tell you how the president will get that done. Take it to
I teach history, not math. Okay, Mr. Lamont. College tuition has been rising nationwide. What can be done to make college more affordable for these young people? I did. I'll finish, Mr.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Additionally, would your candidate be willing to establish a program that allows young people to volunteer their service to the nation for 2 years in exchange for college tuition assistance?
Thank you. I don't know the answer to your last question. It's very specific, but I'd be happy to find out and send the answer back to Chantilly High School. Let me talk a little bit about the premise of your question. Most of what drives college tuition cost, particularly in public schools, public universities, is related to what goes on state by state. We've actually had the lowest tuition increases in Virginia public universities this year that we've had in several years, because we've been able to fund those universities out of tax dollars, and we've been able to work with them to apply cost-saving measures, kind of business-like practices in those schools so that they can keep the tuition low and allow more students to afford education. The other thing that we do, and again, this varies state by state, is ensure more opportunities for in-state students in Virginia's public colleges and universities. And again, at the state level, not something you can do at the Washington level, is to make sure that out-of-state students are paid full freight. If you want to go to UVA and you're from Pennsylvania, you ought to pay the full cost. You shouldn't get a discount. That's not a decision Washington can make and shouldn't make, because it's going to vary from state to state. So while the federal government has Pell Grants and other loan programs, which ought to be and are for everyone, the real issue of college tuition, I think this is an excellent example of how Washington can't control everything and shouldn't try. That's an issue that's really up to individual states to work with their public colleges and universities to keep costs competitive. And I think the results from the last 4 years that Bob McDonald and with, give credit where it's due, other Democratic governors prior to that are now reaping benefits for students that are graduating Virginia high schools and want to go to public colleges and universities.
Thank you, Mr.
I was a professor and a department head at a small college for 4 years, so I had insight into how all my students were coming in and how they were paying and how that system worked. And I can tell you that the reason that tuition is what it is because of the federal government's involvement. If the federal government guarantees a loan for $27,000 a year worth of tuition, what do you think the minimum a college is going to charge for tuition? If you say $27,000, you go to the head of the class, because the tuition rates, every time the federal government changed the loan guarantees, the tuition rates went up. The federal government cannot solve this problem and only makes it worse, same as healthcare. So what we need to do, and the Republicans talk about, and you heard him say it's a state solution, but did he say let's get rid of Pell Grants, let's get rid of these loans? No, they're not talking about doing that, and as long as they're funneling money into the system, then the rates are going to continue up. We need to have competitive college costs, and people are going to compete. You see that with like the University of Phoenix, trying to compete online. They're doing a great job lowering costs, and if they didn't have that government support, their costs would even be lower. So getting the federal government out of the education business, which it has no legal authority to be in. Read the Constitution. You won't find it in there, and therefore it should not be done. Virgil Goode is going to veto that spending because it's wrong and we can't afford it.
Thank you, Mr.
In Virginia, we all respect Mr. Jefferson, who has described in great length a vision of a well-educated society as central to our notion of democracy. You've heard me describe President Obama's commitment to ensuring the financing mechanisms are focused on your benefits. It's the greatest return on taxpayer investment. If you do the calculation, our investments in you and your lifetime earnings, because you've got higher skills, pays itself in dividends. So it's the right thing to do. But there are two aspects of the President's commitment to college affordability that I want to highlight as slightly more nuanced than what you heard me say before. Number one, the President believes we need innovation in higher ed. That's why we've invested $2 billion in one-time funds through the Recovery Act, through the Affordable Care Act, it's a combination of health care and higher ed opportunity, $2 billion in new online courses to bring about innovation, to say there should be new models of opportunity for you to connect to those institutions of higher education, and Virginia is embracing it. We've got universities throughout Virginia engaged in those resources to produce those innovative new products. But my final point is to say thank you to Governor McDonnell. This is not about partisan bickering or fighting. This is an area where both parties believe in our future, and I applaud Governor McDonnell. He used Recovery Act funds to create the first ever database, and I believe they'll get the money voted for this too, first ever database that tells you, before you enroll in college, what university, program, and course schedule will achieve the highest salary prospects for you, so that when you make the choice of where you want to go to college, it's not this black box. You'll have the information you need. It was published just a month ago on a website that you all have access to here in Virginia, run by SHEV, the State Council of Higher Education. Please visit it and take a look at the data so that you know which program is going to yield you the best return of your investment. Go look it up. Thank you.
I agree with much of what Mr. Turner said. Look at what happened with housing back in the early to mid-zeros. There was all sorts of low interest rate, easy money available. It fueled the housing bubble that burst beginning in 2006 and was directly responsible for the financial crisis in the fall of 2008 and on into 2009. It was the easy money that fueled the housing bubble. It's the same thing with college. It's all that federal money, it's low interest rate loans, it is absolutely fueled price inflation in college. The federal government is largely responsible for that. In answer to your question, no. I am not aware that Governor Johnson would support a program whereby if people gave 2 years of volunteer service, they would have their college subsidized. I would go further than that, though, and say the following. I was the Libertarian candidate for governor in 2001 here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I called for a complete separation of school and state for grades 13 and above. I am opposed to any sort of state subsidization for higher education. It is a perverse redistribution of wealth from people, from society in general, to people who come from more affluent families and are going to be more affluent in the future due to their college education. In the book Capitalism and Freedom, which I highly recommend, 1962, Milton Friedman, he talked about a different way to finance college, and that's through equity investment. People investing. We heard earlier about the shortage of skills. We probably do underinvest in human capital here in the United States. But how about a system whereby there was equity investment, whereby people make an arrangement with students to say, okay, for the first X years of your career, I get a certain percentage of your earnings. There would be a market in this, a robust market, and you could cut a deal whereby somebody would pay for your education, and then you would reimburse them through part of their wages, your wages at the beginning of the career, and you would get through school with 0 loans. That's the way we should go, through a free market financing and operation of education. Thank you.
Okay, gentlemen, this is going to be the last question. Well, which means I start with Mr. Turner. And after that, we're going to open it up to the students and the faculty here in the audience. Okay? The United States is increasingly populated by people born in other countries. Many of the students in this room were either born elsewhere or were born to parents who were born elsewhere. What is your candidate's position on immigration in general? Additionally, should it be easier or more difficult to become a U.S. citizen?
Virgil Goode is the only candidate running for president that wants a near total moratorium on immigration. When you are going through difficult times in your family, you don't open your doors and feed the entire neighborhood. Okay, and that is what we are doing. We have no control of our borders, and that is a big security and terrorism problem as well. Now, my grandparents fled Russia during the troubled times in the early 1900s, and they came over here and they found a home. They abided by the laws of immigration, and I am so thankful they did. And I believe we should do the same thing. We are supposed to be a nation of laws. But we do need to get control of the situation. We have millions of people going around that are afraid because they know they're illegal, they know they've broken the law. We have people coming across the border that they know that they're breaking the law. We have people that live along the border in cities where it is a war zone. We have to get control of that. You should not have to live in El Paso, Texas and worry about getting shot because of drug wars with the Mexicans coming across the border, coming across the Rio Grande River. Okay, we need to put a stop to that, and Virgil Good believes that once we get that under control, then we can bring in and allow people to come in, and there can be lotteries, there can be skills. We can bring in the people that have the skills. We talked about, we have missing certain skills for our job market. Employers can't find those skills. That's great. Let's do that when we get the unemployment rate down. And regarding, people say, oh, we have to have those people. There are jobs Americans won't do. As long as you are paying Americans to not work, you're right. They're not going to go do a hard job in the sun all day or some job that may be boring. If we're going to pay them,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
They're not going to take those jobs.
This issue is deeply personal for me. My father came to this country because President Johnson opened up doors of opportunity to my father and eventually my mom. He then went on to earn 3 patents in this country and has contributed to economic growth. President Obama, within 2 weeks of my getting a Senate confirmation to join the administration, had a meeting with Senators McCain and others to talk about a strategy to move immigration reform. And he came out of that meeting and said, while we're working through the politics of this issue, I am directing my staff in 90 days to make it easier to organize and apply for current benefits based on the existing rules that we have. And I had to go to work in 90 days to make sure that our immigration websites and service centers embrace a more innovative and lightweight approach. Our economy is built on entrepreneurs who come from all over the world to start their businesses here. Nearly 50% of all the startups in Silicon Valley were founded at least with one immigrant founder. In the last decade, that has gone down to 40% because immigrants no longer feel welcome in a culture of this hatred that you hear from the other side of the aisle. And they're growing jobs, but they're growing them overseas. President Obama is deeply committed to solving this issue. He's moved forward administratively on the DREAM Act. He's moved forward on ideas to give an entrepreneurial visa using existing authorities to make it easier for folks to stay in this country and create jobs. Senators Warner and Rubio are collaborating in a Startup Act 2.0 to specifically do what the president said when he presented his framework on immigration reform, to allow, if you have a science, technology, engineering degree in this country, we should essentially staple your green card and say thank you and help us grow the American economy. The pie in America needs to grow, not be redistributed. You grow when great ideas come into new products and services that solve global challenges. And President Obama is deeply committed to making this happen.
Thank you,
Mr. Only get cooperation from the right to get it done.
Governor Johnson definitely wants to make immigration to the United States easier. No question about that. We should have an open but regulated immigration system. Our immigration system is absolutely positively broken. I could tell you of a friend from France was here on a green card. She had to go back. She had to leave. She was a productive member of this society. Due to the bureaucracy in the Immigration and Naturalization Service, she had to return to France for several months until her green card finally came through. Then she came back at great cost to her, great cost, I think, to our society. Governor Johnson wants to have a work visa program for people can apply for work visas to legally come to the United States. You know what, if you have too much illegal immigration, you know, the best solution is to make more of it legal. That's what Governor Johnson wants to do, to have a work visa program. However, he wants a one-strike-and-you're-out policy. That is, if you circumvent a legal work visa program, which will allow you, assuming you pass a background check, into the United States. If you violate that once, that's it, you're out, you can't get back in. The bottom line, I think, is this, is that the United States has been greatly supplemented over more than a century by immigration in this nation. It has been a wonderful thing to this nation. I think that people should be able to immigrate to the United States, assuming they are not a security threat, assuming that they can get here on their own or are subsidized privately. I agree with Mr. Turner, they should not be, the welfare problem is a separate issue, but they should not be a security threat. If they don't have a criminal background, if they don't have a serious communicable disease, they should be able, through an open and regulated process, to immigrate to the United States with a path to citizenship. Thank you.
Let me just, although I agree with a number of things that Mr. Chopra said about immigration, and I know Mitt Romney does, I want to take issue with this idea that Republicans are anti-immigrant. That's just wrong, okay? So get that out. If anybody's still thinking that, or you hear somebody say that, you'll need to challenge them. I'll tell you what I think, and I know Mitt Romney agrees. As long as people from all over the world still want to come to America to pursue their dreams, the future of our country is very bright, okay? We need to make legal immigration easier and illegal immigration harder. That was the point that Mitt Romney made during the debates. I think it was on the second debate. President Obama, when he was elected, had 60 votes in the U.S. Senate, an unblockable majority, had a majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. We all knew, Republicans and Democrats, that the immigration laws of this country were not working and needed to be fixed. And when Democrats and the president had control of Washington, they did nothing. The reason why we're still talking about this problem today is because they didn't do their job when they had a chance. And just to give you a sense of how rare that is, I don't think in my lifetime there's been another president who had a majority who had a majority of the same party in the House and 60 members of the Senate of the same party as well. That just almost never happens. So they dropped the ball. They blew it. That's why this discussion is still on the table. In terms of what we need to do, and it's a complicated issue. We don't have time to go into in detail. When I say make it easier to process, not pay so many legal fees, the paperwork, the years that it takes to get a work permit, to get a green card, and eventually citizenship. At the same time, we need to give faith, we need to keep faith with the people who have done it legally. It's a slap in their face to turn the other way and ignore illegal immigration, or to say, hey, everybody can be a citizen someday, even if you came here illegally, because if you said that, why come here legally? Everybody will come here legally. So that's the kind of emphasis that we need to have in immigration. Thank you.
Can we have a hand for women? Hold those hands. Can we have a hand for our kids? Okay, now we're going to open it up. Catherine, come down here. When I call you, you come down here. I got the mic. Jump over, no problem. That's good.
My question is, where does each candidate stand on environmental policies as far as environmental preservation, and like, what are we going to do for the whole oil problem, and how are we going to respect the environment in regards to our energy crisis?
Anybody want to jump on that one first? Okay, Mr. Lamont, you go first. We'll come down. If you all want to have a statement, one minute.
No, I think a good question, and it's related to what I alluded to, I think, in answering an earlier question. There's a lot of agreement, you might not sense it in watching the news media, on protecting the environment, and there has been for decades between Republicans and Democrats. What's on the endangered species list, protecting lands, national parks, things like that. The real difference, I think, between a Barack Obama administration and a Mitt Romney administration is, are we going to really apply cost-benefit analysis before we apply regulations administered by the EPA and other agencies? We've really got to say, is this not just going to make people feel good? Is this regulation not just well-intended, but is it actually going to do good? And what's the harm it might cost in terms of jobs, for example? Because the EPA regulations on business can really prevent people from, and have prevented, the economy from expanding in certain highly regulated industries. So I think the distinction between the candidates is how well you're going to apply cost-benefit analysis and really look at both sides of the equation before regulations are implemented.
Okay. Mr. Redpath? Well, I'm going backwards.
Oh, okay.
I don't have to count that now.
I think it's important to remember that the nations with the cleanest environments are the most affluent nations. The first thing you have to do is have a healthy economy. That is the real driver of a clean environment. Beyond that, I think that I agree that there has to be a cost-benefit analysis on regulations to make sure that they're reasonable. I think the idea that carbon dioxide is a pollutant is ridiculous. I think that's an example of a regulation or a pursuit of regulation that would not withstand a cost-benefit analysis. And there's also, if you want to read about common sense ways to benefit the environment, I would recommend a book called Cool It, which talks about basically simple things that can be done for greater energy efficiency, including the way buildings are built, things that are within our reach without massive governmental outlays. And there are these solutions available out there, and that's what we should pursue. But it ultimately has to come down to a cost-benefit analysis.
Thank you. Mr. Drummond.
So, President Obama cares deeply about this issue. Even our military, our Joint Chiefs has said climate change is a significant threat to our American security. President Obama will suggest three things. Number one, let's ensure that we've invested in the foundation of a clean energy future. That's R&D, that's breakthrough new technologies, that's ensuring that we have a fighting chance to produce the energies of the future to ensure our economy is growing. Number one. Number two, we need to spark innovation. The President used smart regulation to convince the auto companies to agree on doubling the fuel efficiency standards on our cars. We didn't have to pass a new law. We got business leaders and environmental groups together to form these new CAFE standards, and through collaboration, we've created a new rule that has established the mechanism for breakthrough new technologies, including startups in Lynchburg, Virginia, who have ideas on how we can get to that CAFE standard. And finally, we need to take advantage of energy efficiency. That's involving investments in our smart grid, so we can connect clean energy to our economy. That's what we're going to do.
When the government gets involved, they do things like ethanol, which is less efficient than gasoline, it pollutes more, and then it causes a global food crisis. But we have to use it. That is what the federal government and management from Washington does. Ladies and gentlemen, we could be paying $1 to $2 for our fuel costs if Congress would get out of the energy business. We are sitting on so much energy in this nation, we should be exporting to the Arabs and not the other way around. But because of regulation, because of government interference, we can't do that. We need to keep the environment clean, but we also need to not fall for this hoax of global warming. Look at the ice caps in Antarctica, which have been growing, which is where 90% of the ice is. They're talking about the North Pole, but hey, what's happening in the South Pole? Polar bears are doing fine, and look at the warming trend. They just announced over the last 16 years, all their predictions were wrong, and we've been flat. Don't fall for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay. Michael. If it's not, I'll cut you off, Michael.
Okay, so I'm aware of your three candidates' positions on same-sex marriage, not yours. But I want to ask not just what your position on the issue is as for whether you support it or not, but what exactly you'll do about it, if you'll do anything beyond your saying you approve or disapprove.
Mr. Redpath, you're raising your hand, so you want to obviously answer this one first.
Yes, and thank you for the cream puff question. Hey, my slogan for governor, and When I ran in 2001 as a Libertarian candidate for governor of Virginia, my slogan was anything that's peaceful. It's not a passive statement. It means that anything that's peaceful should be legal. Gay marriage is a peaceful thing, and therefore it ought to be legal. Governor Johnson is in favor of legal gay marriage, and that is, I just gave you the standard by which nearly every public policy should be evaluated. So that is the governor's position, and that's the Libertarian position on the issue.
Anybody else would like to? Mr. Joba, okay.
Well, I'll just say very quickly, obviously this is something the President believes. Our country is stronger when we tap into the expertise of all Americans. So any of these attempts to kind of constrain and make people feel ostracized in our society, President Obama is fighting strongly against. We repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We've expanded the potential for hate crimes laws to protect people who are subject to abuse. And the President has expressed his personal support for same-sex marriage. But it goes beyond just these statements. I was with the President who convened an anti-bullying summit at the White House 3 years in a row. We are collaborating with the internet community and others, at least when I was there, to ensure that our systems in the country are protecting people, preventing bullying online, and to ensure we have a more rapid response to address. These are essentially things that are hindering people's talents to connect and succeed in our economy. So that is how we are going to focus on this issue, ensure that everybody feels that they have the nurturing and support they need.
Thank you, Mr. Joffre.
Thank you.
The number one determinant of how well people are doing financially in their lives is their family status. We have some communities where 60–70% of the children are born out of a mom and dad marriage situation. And it is destroying our society. We are not better off as a result of all of that going on. Also, we do have to have some basic moral standards in our society. And Virgil Goode would sign, well, he wouldn't have to sign, but he would support a marriage amendment for the Constitution, and he will, unlike President Obama, enforce the law, which was passed under a Democratic administration, that says one state doesn't have to adopt gay marriage because another state has passed it. This is not really about freedom, because people have the freedom to live their lives the way they want to. We don't want to be in your bedrooms, but we have to have some minimum moral standards.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Turner. Mr. Lemonian, would you like to comment?
Not to restate some of the things that have already been said, but I think that the premise of the question really relates to a topic that's come up in the debates and my comments earlier, and that is, what's the right level of government to make decisions, particularly relating to what I'll just call generally family issues, relationship issues. It's going to be a problem for the country if Washington is in this business of one law fits all. And I think what you may have heard Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan say in the debates, maybe not specific to this question, is the federal government needs to be doing things that it can do best, and the decisions on other issues really need to be left to states and local governments, because that's where those governments are closest to the people. And to use a phrase, a government that governs closest to the people governs best. That means some states are going to be different than others on social issues. And overall, that's better than trying to get a uniform federal policy in a lot of these areas. So I think that's maybe my contribution to that answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, we're going to have two more questions, okay? We have one faculty member and another student. You will have your feet to the fire. 30 seconds, okay? Mr. Frank.
Well, first off, I'd like to thank all of you for coming to Chantilly High School. It's been a great session. My question is about education. I've heard you all touch on it. And even in debates, most times when we talk about education, it's framed looking at maybe the negative schools, the failing schools. But when we have a school here like Chantilly High School, which is a really highly successful school, yet teacher salaries most of the time have been frozen. We're losing great teachers. Programs are being cut. Fees are being raised. What are each of you or your candidates going to do to help schools like Chantilly High School and other schools in Fairfax County continue to maintain high standards?
To be biased, I'd like you to talk 1 hour on this subject, each of you. Now, 30 seconds. Right down the line, go.
We don't need the federal government involved, and it's not authorized to do that by the Constitution. That will increase costs, and it will lower quality. I know from homeschooling our kids, you can get a great education at a lot less than $11,000 to $12,000 a year. We don't accept monopolies anywhere else. Why would we accept one in school? So we need to get government out, and at the federal level, that's definitely what we're going to do. No spending.
Okay.
At the center of a great school are a series of great teachers. And President Obama has a budget that reflects that priority, but he's also looking to bring innovation to schools. He, under the Race to the Top program, which Virginia does not participate in, is creating an opportunity for startups and innovators to support teachers to ensure personalized instruction for every child. This is an opportunity that the rest of the country will get unless Virginia gets its act together, and I hope we will.
Okay.
I agree with Mr. Turner, and Governor Johnson agrees with Mr. Turner. He did not say that we would abolish the Department of Education, but we would. That is the position of Governor Johnson. It should be left to the state governments and society below the state governments, including individual families. Freedom in education is where we need to go. The public school monopoly has not worked well over the past 40 years, and more money, while real education spending has tripled, we need to change that paradigm and get the federal government out.
Thank you, Mr. Redmond. Mr. Lamagna.
Thank you. Again, the question presumes that the federal government is really going to make a significant day-to-day difference in a public school. It's really the state and local governments and the local school boards that do that. In Virginia, Fairfax County has received the highest funding level from the state ever in the current 2-year budget, more than $500 million. Now, that's not getting the local schools and teachers. Something's wrong in Virginia and Fairfax County, not who's president of the United States.
Okay, thank you. Rustin. Here, I'll come around. You can stand here, but you want people to hear you.
If your candidate were to be elected, they would likely oversee the appointment of a few Supreme Court justices. How do you believe that this would affect Roe v. Wade, whether it be brought back to court and even overturned?
We'll start with you and go in order. 30 seconds.
Virgil Goode will only appoint judges that will read the Constitution and govern according to it. Roe v. Wade was made up law. The judges just decided what they wanted and they dictated it to the country. Whether you support or against abortion, which Virgil Goode is the only 100% pro-life candidate in this race, that is the wrong way to do it. If you want to change the Constitution, amend the Constitution. Don't put judges out there to make up laws, because that's going to come back to haunt you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Thank you. Mr. Chalcroft.
So, President Obama's record on Supreme Court justices is clear. No litmus test, focus on excellence. And that's the choices he'll carry forward in the next administration. But I must say this general observation, folks. Despite people's views about the economy, and you might have angst about where we are as a country, on issues of access to women's health, this is a stark, contrasted race. And if you wanted a heaping side of wrong answer, the unintended consequences of choosing the other candidate will be a very difficult constraint on women's access to reproductive rights. And I would take that very seriously.
All I know is that Governor Johnson is pro-choice. And so therefore, I doubt that it would, I really don't know how his Supreme Court appointments would affect Roe v. Wade. I doubt that it would harm Roe v. Wade, but I certainly do understand the argument against the decision. I would further say this, just digressing momentarily. I think that the way Supreme Court justice hearings are held these days are a total joke. It's very serious appointing someone to the U.S. Supreme Court. We need to fundamentally reform the hearings process and the appointment of Supreme Court justices.
Thank you, Mr. Redpath. Mr. Lamagna.
I think Governor Romney has said this with respect to Supreme Court justices to make 2 points. One, that there should be no litmus test. So it's not a question of how a judge feels on this issue or any other issue. They're there to call the balls and strikes, not to legislate their own will from a court. The second thing he has said, however, though, is that judges ought to be reading and interpreting the Constitution as it says. And one of the provisions in there, and Paul Ryan mentioned this in the vice presidential debate, is the 10th Amendment. which says that unless the federal government is specifically charged with the responsibility.
Thank you, Mr. Lemonnier.
It's left to the states.
Thank you. Okay. Good question. Good question. Now, you have 1 minute each for closing statements. We started with Mr. Turner at the beginning of the morning. We'll start with Mr.
Romney?
Lemonnier, yes. With Mr. Lemonnier, and work our way.
Can I have a loan, Mr. Romney?
And we'll start with Mr. Lemonnier and work our way down. Okay? 1 minute.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I think we've got some issues hopefully clarified and are helpful to you, those of you who vote. Frankly, whether you plan to vote for my candidate or another candidate, I hope you will vote. We all have a responsibility to do that. Just to summarize and maybe go back to my earlier comments, a lot of things we heard today relate to the role of the federal government in American society, what government can and cannot do, and what government should and should not do. If you're someone who thinks that a larger role for government is going to make our country better in all the ways it might, federal, state, and local, then I think Mitt Romney ought to be your candidate. If you'd like to see me afterwards to get signed up to work these next couple weeks or so, I'd be happy to get you a volunteer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lemonnier.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to vote for Gary Johnson, and I think he's the best candidate who wants you to have freedom in both your economic life and your personal life. But most of the people, let's face it, in the United States, most of the voters are going to go into that voting booth and say, oh, I got to vote for the lesser of two evils. Let's face it, most people are going to be thinking that. Our democracy doesn't have to be that way. Sometimes, though, you don't even have two choices. Does anybody know, for the 100 single-member district elections for the Virginia House of Delegates in 2011, how many of those districts had only one candidate on the ballot? Just one candidate. 63. 63 out of 100 districts, House districts, had only one candidate on the ballot. This year in Georgia, 77% of the state legislative races have only one candidate on the ballot. Our democracy is broken. Write these down, please. Please do some research on instant runoff voting, which does away with the so-called spoiler effect. Go to fairvote.org. I'm on FairVote's board. Most nations in the world use proportional representation for legislatures, and also go to genuinerepresentation.org/Congress for new ideas to reinvigorate our democracy.
Folks, this debate is not about whether government is big or small. It's about whether we have a smarter government that is working for you. There is a sense of disbelief that somehow we're not going to make it through these difficult times, that the economy for us and the next generation will be worse than the one for our parents. I tell you, if you join me in supporting President Barack Obama for a second term, together we will punch a hole through that wall of disbelief, and we will build an economy that's sustainable and strong for our generation and the generation to follow, because we've built that foundation over the last 4 years, and now it's time for us to work on top of it. Let's work together, let's solve these problems, and let's make it happen for the country!
Thank you, Mr. Salper. Mr. Turner.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you want a difference, you've got to do something different. If you want different issues, different debt, different wars, get us out of those wars, get us out of the debt, you're going to have to vote to do something differently. The big box parties want you to be afraid because as long as they can keep you in fear that they're the only two choices, then they know they're going to keep their power and nothing is ever going to change. Don't give in to that fear. When they say we can't win, that's all they're trying to do. They're trying to lower the Constitution, lower your ability for freedom. I'd ask you to vote for freedom this election day. John F. Kennedy said every time that we try to lift a problem from our shoulders and shift that problem into the hands of the government, to the same extent, we are sacrificing the liberties of the people. Virgil Goode will vote according to the Constitution. He will govern according to the Constitution. Vote for freedom this election day.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Clement has some Chantilly swag for you. That's partially because our budgets are so low here. If students wish to come and speak to the candidate, feel free. We thank you. Come down and join the students in the pit here. Feel free.
All right.
Thank you.